Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast, which is powered by SIG. And today I'm joined by two guests. It's an interview I've actually been really looking forward both to recording and then once I record it to publishing for some time. Well, I'm joined by Warrick Cramer. Warrick is the CEO of Tomorrow Street, and Mark Perera, who is the CEO of Old Street Labs. And somebody, if you're a regular listener to the show, will recognize Mark as a frequent contributor to Art of Procurement. Now, I've long admired Vodafone as being a pioneer both in embracing and supporting supplier-enabled innovation and startup ecosystems. I'm not going to give away all the details here in my introduction, but last year Vodafone partnered with the government of Luxembourg to launch what I believe is a really innovative approach to working with smaller growing companies. They named that initiative Tomorrow Street. And so the purpose of today's discussion was for me to learn more and dig a little bit deeper into what they're doing. And rather than just focus on the buy side with Warrick, I also asked Mark to join the call so he can give the supplier perspective, because Mark's company, Old Street Labs, were actually the second company to formally partner with Vodafone and Tomorrow Street earlier in the year. And if you're interested in hearing Vodafone's approach to supplier-enabled innovation, this really is a must listen. Now, for context, I started the interview by asking Warrick if he could just give me the elevator pitch on what exactly Tomorrow Street is.
So Tomorrow Street is really an accelerator, I suppose, in some terms, where Vodafone, we built this sort of centre where startups could come in at a late stage, startups that is, and we could really help them to develop their business and look at their business models and really industrialise what they do to roll out to a broader audience. Because one thing that we have in Vodafone is that we have a very big, vast market. And so we saw the opportunity in building Tomorrow Street was how do we differentiate ourselves from everyone else out there in the marketplace in terms of accelerators and incubators. And one of the key things was let's provide an environment, let's pull in all the resources that we need to make these companies successful, and then let's build the strategies and the go-to-market strategies and roll them out. So we really look at globalizing startups, but attaching them to real customers along the way.
And I've got a whole load more questions. I want to touch on those later rather than digging deep now. But there was just one thing that I wanted to follow up on. You mentioned it as being targeted towards kind of later stage startups. I just wonder if you could define that a little bit or put some boundaries around what those kind of companies might look like.
Sure. I think one of the things that we looked at when I was sort of doing the research and trying to build this model out and build Tomorrow Street was I realized that we couldn't be everything to everyone, and we had to find a place that was important to us and where our key strengths lied within Vodafone and and within our procurement organization. So I think from how we define the late stage startups for us was that companies that were sort of growing, they could be of different sizes. So I don't always base it on revenue, but I look and see have they got real customers, have they gone out to the market, have they got some sort of investors there, have they got a sort of stable management team and a stable team, and have they really got something, a really nice solid roadmap in terms of where they're going in some direction. Yeah. And rather than defining a startup as just an idea.
Yeah, so they have that demonstrated product market fit. They're not trying to find kind of their role in the world, but they're kind of past that and ready to start scaling.
Yeah, and I think, for a lot of the companies, because I meet so many companies and I see so many, and, sometimes they do have a product that is working in a particular segment of the market, and then we look at it and we think, wow, this is really fantastic. But if we tweak it a little bit, all of a sudden we can widen those segments and, the success obviously will be a lot greater. So we look at everything, but I think there has to be that sort of foundation and that base already laid. Right. And that's what we really look for.
Interesting. Well, as I say, I got some more questions later, but I wanted to just dig a little bit more into your background just so that the listeners can kind of understand your context of your career and kind of how you've come to be involved in in supplier innovation. And so the easy question, I guess, on that is, if you could just share a little bit more about your journey and kind of the path that brought you to first Vodafone and then Tomorrow Street.
No, cool. Well, to be really honest with you, I've never worked for anyone in my life. So
Right.
This is literally my first job. And I had no intention of ever working for anyone. I'd always sort of based my entire career, and even as a teenager, was always about, trying to, I suppose, build my own journey. And I always loved building things. And I think business in general just came very naturally to me from an entrepreneurial point of view. And so I've been very fortunate over my time where I'd sort of, I'd invented a mobile payment system that went on to be sort of a global platform. I've gone into automotive, which I still currently own part of an automotive company, and sort of other sort of different type of businesses. I sort of got up to a point in my career where I did stop working, and I sort of stepped down from my sort of day-to-day sort of operational type of work, and I started doing a lot of voluntary work and helping small businesses out and doing a lot of mentoring work.
Yep.
And it was really, really rewarding. And I really, just personally, I really enjoyed that sort of challenge to sort of see companies that had, had the struggles, and I sort of could sort of mirror and see the sort of, the difficulties that they had, and sort of, I suppose, back that into my own sort of experiences and trying to guide them and help them to make it a little bit easier. And so I really enjoyed what I did, and Vodafone, then the procurement company, sort of approached me and sort of said, Warrick, we'd really like you to look at innovation within our organisation. And to be really open and transparent, I actually originally said no,
Right.
Because I knew I'd never worked for anyone, and I honestly did not think I'd be able to survive in a corporate environment.
Right.
To really be honest. And so initially my initial reaction was no. And then I sort of had to take a step back and said, well, as an entrepreneur, one of the key characteristics that as an entrepreneur that you have to have is that you always have to go outside of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm. You always have to reinvent yourself, and you can never stay static in anything that you do. So, and I personally believe that when you're the most uncomfortable in your life is when you grow the most.
Right.
And it's when it's most amount of opportunities coming to you. So I thought about it, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to bite the bullet, and I'm just going to come into the corporate environment. I have no idea what I'm going to do. And I was very fortunate, or unfortunate, depends on how you look at it. But Vodafone gave me a blank sheet of paper and said, Warrick, we just want you to create some innovation and activity in the procurement and just see where you can go with this. And sort of 12 months later, I sort of put together Tomorrow Street, and here we are.
So for it really resonates when you say, you've not worked for anybody before, and then coming into a huge organization, it's like chalk and cheese, isn't it? I wonder, and I'm asking so that others who are listening who are thinking that they would benefit from somebody who has a similar background and is interested in bringing somebody into their organization that maybe is a lot more entrepreneurial than corporate, and obviously that's a different kind of person than what they're used to, by hiring folks who have worked more in the corporate environment. What were some of the things that Vodafone did, or perhaps even beyond that, what you would recommend others listening do to actually provide a platform to make that a transition that works? Because I'm sure it comes with a lot of risks from a hiring company perspective as well, in that you're really looking for and have experience of something very different than most of the folks that they're hiring.
I think one of the key sort of, I suppose, turning points for me to make the decision to come in was a couple of things. Was, could I make a difference on a bigger scale? Mm-hmm. And do that, I needed a very supportive management team above me. And I needed a management team that would sort of partially leave me alone and trust my decisions. And if I felt that was going to be the case, then I would have never joined Vodafone. Right. I would have never joined the procurement company. And, I just wouldn't have gone there because I knew it wouldn't work. I think the challenge is that I do sometimes speak a totally different language to the corporate environment, and I probably learned a little bit over time in terms of how they speak and what's really, some of the things in the background in terms of what keeps them up at night, which is different to an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And so I've had to navigate that through. But I think, I think the only advice I can give to the listeners is that if you are planning on employing someone from an entrepreneurial background, you need to give them a bit of scope. They will come up with ideas that probably seem so crazy and so out of the norm and so out of the fit. But I think taking a step back and just digesting it, and I think having a little bit of trust in terms of, letting them build on it. I think that's really the only advice I can really give them.
So why do you think that that Vodafone really made the decision to invest in a role like yours and bringing in somebody with your background into the company? Especially, as I say, it's an unusual hire for a big company.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think Vodafone really, from a procurement point of view, understood and sort of had some really good foresight in understanding that the landscape in the market and how the suppliers would be in the future is going to change. Mm-hmm. And, the traditional suppliers will always be there, but there's also going to be this new flurry of smaller suppliers coming to the market. And how you'd actually deal with them is entirely different to how you deal with the bigger sort of organizations or the traditional suppliers. So I think Vodafone really had a really sort of good foresight in that and realized that in order to make those changes, they needed to bring someone else in there from a totally different perspective and a totally different viewpoint to inject that perspective. And, as I said, like we're an organization, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of governance, a lot of process, no different to any other procurement organization. But unfortunately or fortunately, one of those problems that come with all that sort of infrastructure is that it becomes very, very slow. Mm-hmm. And you also miss out on opportunities. So, the challenge for Vodafone was how do we actually become quicker and still, bear importance on all the governance and the processes that we've already, that have been embedded there for a reason. And we can't dismiss that, at all. But how do we actually connect with these companies and bring and onboard them?
So would you take a different approach to how you actually looked at working with a smaller company than a larger company? When I mean that, I'm thinking in terms of perhaps the process you go through to select them, the process to contract with them, the process to manage them. And if so, I'm really interested in some real kind of specific examples of things that you did, because I think from what I know of the way that Vodafone works with smaller companies, it's something that other organizations could really take a cue from.
I think the first thing when I started in the organization, I did a lot of observation, and I went around and sat in a lot of the negotiations with a lot of the different teams and all the different sort of network IT services, etc. Mm-hmm. And observed that a lot of the procurement people are fantastic. They're very, very talented, and just really getting the commercial models right, getting the contracts right, getting the negotiation, etc. with the bigger organization. Yeah. Amazing. And I was sort of learning a lot myself, to be really honest. But when I put them in front of a small company, the ability to be able to adapt and change the language was very different. And, to give you some examples, I remember when we were sitting in a negotiation, we brought this smaller company in to come in and, to talk to Vodafone and the procurement sort of guys. And I was sitting there observing, and the procurement guys, and rightly so, went straight into the modelling and the back end and the process and started getting to really questions, which a big organisation could easily handle because they've got all that, the infrastructural side of the business sorted out. And here was this poor person in front of us, which was just getting thrown questions from left, right and centre and really deep questions and not really knowing how to answer it. Mm-hmm. And now it was not that they didn't know how to do it. It was just that, and they weren't doing it. They were actually doing all the right things. But in terms of answering the questions exactly or knowing their corporate language, they didn't know that. Yeah. So automatically there was a perception from the procurement people saying, well, wow, they don't have it or they don't know what they're doing. And then there was a sort of frustration from the other side, from the startup side or the smaller company side, the frustration was coming through while saying, well, I do all these things, but I'm not articulating myself correctly. I'm not using the right corporate words to get it across. Mm-hmm. And it was really, I suppose, an eye-opener for me, and it made me realize that we had to change our people. We had to change to get, open the people's ability to be able to see what was happening on the other side. From a startup's point of view, and understand that they do speak slightly a different language, and express themselves a little bit differently to what they're used to.
Yeah, and everything's not necessarily going to be packaged in the same way that they anticipate with a big company. For one thing that springs to mind is, from my experiences, is things like InfoSec language or everything that all the controls that come around that. Whereas a big company, can withstand the huge audit and can sign up to things like that, and has very deep programs in business continuity, disaster recovery. A startup will approach those things and will have checks and balances in place, but not necessarily using the same terminology as they used to with a big company, or packaged in the same way, or have 20 people they can put in front of a supplier in front of a buyer, to talk about it. And I think it's really important for larger organizations to realize that, as you say, it doesn't necessarily mean that some of those controls aren't in place. It's just a different way of approaching the issue. And that's something I've always kind of struggled with on both the buy side, frankly, and also on the supplier side when I've been providing services.
It's really important. I mean, even looking at just basic contracts, to put a small company in front of a 300-page contract, as an example, or yes. 400-page, whatever it might be, I mean, you just can't do it, and what inadvertently happens is they go, you know what, this corporate is just too difficult to work with, and I don't want to risk my business going in there and signing up for conditions that I don't really particularly understand, and nor can I afford to $20,000 or whatever it might cost for a lawyer to look at it, when I can use that money elsewhere and apply it and actually get an immediate return on that investment. Mm-hmm. So the thinking is different. And so even within just the contracting process, we had to go back and I had to relook at it and say, guys, this is just not going to work. And we need to, and I sort of put the challenge out to our legal team to say, guys, it has to become easier. It has to be shorter. It has to be down from 300 pages down to 3, and make it really, what are those important things? If you had to put it into 3 pages, what would they be?
Yeah.
And it doesn't now, I find that it does not scare those small companies coming into Vodafone. Even little things like terms. How do we actually turn it around quickly for them, that they can get paid quickly, rather than, working on the sort of corporate cycle, because it makes a difference to them.
Yeah, it's so important because, one, the contracts can be, they come across and you can end up spending more time on lawyers than you do actually in there being any profit in a deal, because it's all gone on negotiating a huge contract. On payment terms, there's one of the frustrations, I think, as a small business owner myself as well, is, you're working with companies that might have 90-day payment terms. And obviously cash flow is so important for a small business, and for the larger business, the amounts of money that are being talked about is absolutely nothing, isn't it? It's like a drop in the bucket. And I understand that often there's policy, and if we don't want to break the rules for one, and kind of set that as an example for others, but having it be more programmatic, so something that fits around, okay, when you're a company of this size, we actually work differently from you, gives you a really good reason a real good way, I think, to carve out working differently, having different rules, for the want of a better word.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point. I mean, one of my concerns is that you don't want to put a process in and then people within the organization see as a shortcut into the procurement area. Mm-hmm. And so you still need the checks and balances. You still have to have very, very tight controls around what sort of organization are you defining that falls into that category. To be able to be considered a small enough company that then gets that not preferential treatment, but I think that a different type of treatment that will help them to keep their business turning, the wheels turning.
Right.
So, we went back and we sort of looked at all of that, and I said, okay, well, let's rather than looking at one parameter, let's look at a few different parameters, and if they tick the boxes and all of that, then we put them into an easier process, rather than going through a traditional way of us how we procure things.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I know you've been sitting quietly in the background, and I want to bring you into the conversation a little bit. For regular listeners, Mark, I'm sure that they know who you are, but what I'd love to do as well is, one, if you just give a little bit of background, very quick for folks who may not have come across what you're working on right now, but also, the context of why I invited both you and Warrick to join, and what it is that you at Old Street Labs are doing with Tomorrow Street.
Indeed. Thank you very much. And it's probably the longest amount of time that I've been quiet for quite a long time now, Phil. So,
yeah, I've opened the floodgates now.
You won't probably need to shut up now. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Mark Perera. I guess I got into the procurement world quite a long time ago. So in 2003, I kicked up a business called Procurement Leaders. And it's now 2015, which is quite scary. So for the last 15 years, I've been really looking at how we help progress the procurement function forward in terms of the transformation of the function as a whole, but also some of the key strategies in there through Procurement Leaders. And I think this supplier innovation is one of the key topic areas. It's one of our events at Procurement Leaders, the awards, the magazine, or a lot of the research we provide to our customers. The innovation and the change, and also the disruption of large organizations is key there. I now sit on the board of that business, but I spend 101% of my time on a company called Old Street Labs. And we've been really focused around creating a new category of solution around supplier collaboration and innovation, which is really an enterprise approach of driving both growth and speed to an organization by managing their innovation network. And we've created a platform called Visible, which I'm glad to say Vodafone was one of our early customers, and we've been working closely with the procurement team, but also their technology team in terms of the further development of that product. We also work with other big companies, so big pharmaceutical companies in the space as well. So some of the things that Warrick is saying around the approach of large corporates and how they speak to and work with suppliers, I'm one of those. I guess we're a SaaS company where we're not a publicly traded business where they normally buy their software from. I'm kind of involved with that as a startup, working with large organizations, as you guys were talking about, but also our technology helps in terms of managing those relationships, but also the projects. So I think large organizations need to nurture the relationships of these smaller organizations, which is potentially where they're going to get the new innovation into their organization, because it comes from the earlier stage companies. And also nurturing the projects, so there's innovation POCs. Sometimes when the shiny startup comes in, they're loved to start off with, and there's a lot of passion and time put to them, and then they get dropped into big old corporate down at the bottom of the spend cube there, and there's not much love to them. So I think we're doing that with the technology side, and what Warrick's been trying to do, or is doing with Tomorrow Street, is a really cool marriage. So we're also here because on the podcast today we're actually one of the first companies to sign up to Tomorrow Street and actually use that growth engine, the innovation center of Tomorrow Street, to help us scale our organization, working with Tomorrow Street. And we're also setting up operations in Luxembourg, which I'm super excited about as a hub for Europe, and also technology and everything around our growth strategy as well.
So you mentioned that companies often bring in a startup and it's kind of the shiny toy, and then because of the way that we think about segmentation of suppliers, that they, as you said, they get dropped kind of to it's not a lot of spend, maybe it's not something that's impactful today, and so they get a little bit forgotten about. I wonder if there's things that for the companies you work with, what are they doing to really harness their relationship with you once they've actually gone through the work to bring you on board, and to make sure that they're actually maximizing the potential of working with a smaller, innovative company?
That's the one. I think one of the things is, and I'll go on my personal experiences. We've got one of our customers, and they're a great customer, but sometimes we have to remind them where we sit in their future strategy. So working with their global procurement team and the technology spend they have on us in terms of the overall procurement technology spend, and most people are refreshing their P2B and sourcing suites at the moment, as we all know. So we're quite small, but the other big pillar that they're all talking about is relationship management, both internal partners and supplier partnering and supplier innovation. So when it comes to their leadership team meeting, yes, we come on to the point. There's a cool piece of technology doing this, and then the second part, where they'll spend a few days on, is we now need to change our operating model and our value proposition for procurement, and they're forgetting that the technology we're doing across a section of their business is actually the thing that's going to shift the whole procurement function over. Yeah. So the challenge that we have is keeping the executives understanding that their solutions are sometimes already there. I'm lucky enough that I can tap on the shoulder of the CPOs or the leadership team and remind them, the project we're running over in this region or this part of the business, super important. It solves your value beyond savings, your supplier innovation part. So that's the part. These POCs or these smaller rollouts sometimes get lost until they have such a big budget that then the senior execs care about it. Right. So what am I actually saying? I think the key thing here is when you found that stakeholder, make sure you keep reporting up to them around the progress of what you're doing with other customers, and also make sure those communications you provide to them are in a great way for them to then share them with other senior execs and promote that viral part of what you're doing. So you need to make it easy for them to share the progress, the success you're having, and do that better than any of the other projects that are going on in that organization or that senior executive, because they always want good news and they want ways of quickly sharing that with their peers. So give them the material that they can share is one of the parts to it. And once you found an account where there is good growth, you need to find those people who will be your future champions as well as your current champion as well.
Do you find that most, when you think of your clients, do they mostly have a kind of formalized approach to supplier-enabled innovation? So it's something that they are deliberately trying to invest into, and they recognize the importance of it, and that's why they come across a company like All Street Labs and decide to invest, business in a company like All Street Labs? Or is it just an individual within a company who happens to be a more innovative thinker, and it's just based on that one person and that one person becoming an advocate?
Look, I think supplier innovation is one of those things. Some will say it's like teenage sex. Everyone's talking about it, and not many people are doing it. But maybe as our kids become teenagers, I'm wondering that they will be having too much sex. But a bit worried. But let's say there's a lot of talk about it. Procurement leaders in the events. There's a lot in the magazines. There's a lot on stage. And sometimes I'm surprised, knowing the organizations, what the reality of sitting around it, and there may be pockets of the way they work with suppliers to solve the business needs. And there are some great case studies out there, but there's a lot of talk and very little action on it. I think one of the reasons why I signed up, or we signed up to Tomorrow Street, is because the likes of Warrick there. This is not what Vodafone doing is a fundamental shift in terms of how they see suppliers and how they can drive value to Vodafone as a business, but also how that value can go through to their customers ultimately. So for us, it's about not talking about it and doing it. And I was on a call with one of the top consultancies. He spent a lot of time talking to the board members, and he was saying, look, a lot of people talk about collaboration or supply collaboration, and you've created the mechanism for it, Mark. So this is business partnering as well as supply partnering, and how you make that way. So it's finding it is companies who talk about the innovation side. It can't be just one individual.
Right.
The CPOs have to change what they're doing. I mean, the commercial part on savings is good practice. They have to do that with the commodity things they have. The challenge that procurement organizations do is sometimes they commoditize problems. And actually, these non-commodity problems, they need to find new solutions. Those new solutions might need to be built by collaborating with some of their big suppliers, or collaborating with new companies who are 100% focused on solving that problem, the niche ones, or start monitoring 5 different companies who are on an early stage of solving that, or become the venture client. We are going to be the first customer, because that new piece of technology, that startup, that 5-person or that 20-person team could have such a big impact on our business if they could just bring it a little bit close to here and solve this problem. We will take the gamble on that one. We'll be a fast follower on some of these other ones, but this one is actually there. So when I rate and talk to people who talk about supplier innovation, really give me the what are you doing, what are the case studies, which suppliers have you brought in there from an early stage where you are a venture client and you're taking them through to take them through and give your customer, the internal customer and your end customer, the benefit for them. But they have to start doing and stop talking about it. They have to stop talking about the segmentation of supplier, where they can spend years before they actually do anything. It's about doing it, and then how will you scale that? And that's the interesting part. How do you scale this? How does it become part of the DNA of a large organization that firstly, they work collaboratively with their suppliers to drive growth? Now, that could be, in a manufacturing space, the cost of quality, and we need to reduce that while also kind of moving to continuous manufacturing in one area. It could be the way that we do R&D. But we need to, there's a great quote from a book called The Price of Fish. Large organizations should forget about innovation. What they should focus their efforts on how they acquire innovation from smaller organizations, either through M&A or through purchasing. Now, if you think of what procurement's role is, and what supplier innovation is one of the key pillars of bringing innovation and new speed and growth is how you work with suppliers, both big and small, because they're already solving it. They've got profitability, their profit margins, their whole team are passionate around it. Yeah. So procurement and supplier innovation are one-on-one. It's just about the way you do it to solve the business needs or the future needs of your customers. Or there's the M&A, which will, we're seeing a number of acquisitions. One of my friends' companies just got bought yesterday for $275 million. So he's 2 years into that business. Experian had bought him. He completely disrupted the market, and they've acquired him, which is fantastic for Justin and the team. So I think supplier innovation is not about talking about it. It's about doing it. It's about recognizing suppliers have the capabilities and are willing to invest. If you behave yourself and collaborate with them, you will be the customer choice, and they will bring that to you first. But you have to, as Warrick's doing it at Vodafone and what they've recognized, you have to change the way you're doing things. And I'm not sure it is the current procurement people that are the problem. I think it's what they're measured on. If it's purely on savings, I'm not sure how they change the dynamic. So I think this is for the procurement leaders to actually change it. And hats off to Ninian and Detlev, who have run the Vodafone procurement company and brought in people like Warrick. It's an entrepreneurial environment. And I think that's a key difference from talking about it to doing it.
So, Warrick, I have a question that Mark just mentioned about the way that you measure. And, we in procurement are long measured on savings, but coming from outside of procurement and really building this innovation kind of culture within Vodafone, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you thought about incenting people within the procurement organization to really invest more of their time in searching and proactively looking for innovative suppliers.
It's a very good question, because it's we've got a lot of procurement specialists here in the building, and one of the key challenges, or one of the key areas that I had to look at, was how do I engage these guys? Right. How do I get them excited? How do I get them away thinking about order intake and savings and all the different targets and KPIs that they've got on there? And how do I get them to think about innovation? And one of the key things that's probably worked for us is that I look at them as specialists. I look at them as experts in their area. And so I turn to them, and my team turns to them and says, guys, I don't really know this. I don't understand this. You guys do. and tell me about what's happening in your area. Tell me about the landscape. Tell me, and what I'm inadvertently doing is really I'm looking at the strategic thinking and the strategy of the landscape. I'm really pulling the information from them. And what inadvertently has been happening is because we're sort of showing all this interest, they're starting to bring some new suppliers to us, or new startups or people that they think could really help them in their categories to build it out and to be challengers or disrupt their categories, etc. Because now they've got the mechanism to do so. Because previously, historically, what would have happened is that they would have looked at the small supplier and thought, wow, this is great, but you know what? It's too risky.
Right.
Am I going to take the risk? Absolutely not. Okay, because am I going to spend all this extra time, having conversations with them and courting them and helping them through it when I've got an order that I have to look after and the savings targets I have to meet? No. By having this, and having my team there now, where now they've got the mechanism and that's a conduit to be able to say, well, you know what, I don't have the time, but I can hand it over to these guys in Tomorrow Street. They can have the conversations and then they can pull me in and out as they need, for my opinion. And to a point where they're managing the risk, I can step back in and we can make, and what we do is we make them the hero, right? Because without them, we would have never got the introduction. And it's really, so that's sort of how we do it.
Yeah. No, sorry, Warrick, I didn't mean to interject there. I just was interested, a couple of things. One is that I asked you what Tomorrow Street was at the very top of the show. I said I wanted to go into it a little bit more, and I'd love to learn a little bit more about the model. And as you do that, one of the questions that just came to me as you were talking then is, what's the model of engagement within Vodafone? So does somebody from Vodafone say, hey, I have a need in this category, go and help find me some suppliers? Or is it a little bit more organic than that? But first, just a little bit deeper on the model, and then I'd love to know about how you decide which areas to go after.
Yeah, sure. So a little bit more deep on the model. When I sort of came into Vodafone, one of the things that I looked at was I'd spent a lot of time researching and, going to procurement leader conferences and listening to other organizations and their challenges around suppliers and how they dealt with, suppliers. And to be really honest, I really hate using that word. For me, it's all about partner.
Yeah.
Because I think when you talk about suppliers, for me personally, it's very transactional, and I don't think you can really solve the relationships on transactions. I think it's I like to partner with people because you build and you develop together, and you're sort of building that long-term sustainable view. But one of the things that we looked at was, number one was, and I said this sort of earlier, was that you can't be everything to everyone, and why I'm sort of bringing this up is that every organization has different strengths. And when you look at innovation, yes, it's a buzzword, and yes, everyone uses it and all this sort of stuff. But every organization operates differently. So some organizations have a very big R&D focus and are very good at it, and they've got the right skill set to be able to do it. Others have got, the more sort of customer, sort of centric sort of expertise, etc. So I think one of the things is that we needed to find where we actually sat and where our strengths were.
Yeah. And
looking at the procurement department, I realised when we looked at Tomorrow Street was, how can we actually make a difference? And taking a step back into my own personal journey was one of the reasons that I wanted to join Vodafone was that I wanted to be able to help companies on a much bigger scale. And I needed to have this platform to be able to do it, these small organizations that I could really personally, my team could personally make a difference and make an impact. And so we sort of did all the research and, sort of went out, spoke to entrepreneurs, spoke to venture capitalists, I sat in incubators, I sat in accelerators all around the world. And what I found was that talking to a lot of the smaller companies, a lot of them don't trust big organizations. And a lot of them are actually afraid of dealing with big organizations. And which was, and it didn't surprise me because I have to admit, in the early days, was also very, very worried about dealing with big organizations. There's always this fear that once I go and show the organization what I'm doing, and I haven't probably got my business model absolutely suspect, they're going to take my idea and they're going to steal it.
Yeah.
And I don't have the resources to be able to go there and fight it. And so there's always this sort of fear factor that was there, which I knew about, and that talking to sort of a lot of the young entrepreneurs was still very, very much real. So then sort of talking to a lot of people and going through it all, I sort of found out, and this happened to me as well, was as you go in, present an idea, you get the venture capitalists of the corporate innovation program. And the first thing they do is, we need to take equity. Mm-hmm. We need to have a slice of your business and work with us. And once again, you've got this little entrepreneur person sitting there going, well, I've really given up everything. Everyone, in my family, my friends, everyone thinks I'm absolutely crazy. And everyone's told me just to go and work for someone to get the security. But I really doing, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to give up, but I'm not going to also just hand over 50% or 30% of my company just so I can actually go and work with this big organization. And so this was another barrier. So I sort of looked at all these different barriers or different sort of concerns that some of the smaller companies had. And then from a corporate point of view, I looked and said, well, if a corporate takes equity and what happens? Do they just take equity and leave the companies alone to do their own thing? Or do they take equity and get involved in the business? Does that mean that the company, the small startup, now has to do full reporting and all these governance type of reports that have to go through on a monthly basis? Is that what they need to do? And so that was another fear for a lot of the smaller organizations. So taking all of this into account, what I did with the model with Tomorrow Street was, number one, I'm not going to take equity because the minute I take equity, it means that I'm going to bog down this small organization with a lot of reporting that they probably don't need to do. All right, that was number one. Number two was how do I get over the fear factor of them dealing with a bigger corporate organization, and sort of took a step back, and from an entrepreneurial point of view, and any of those who are listening to this who are entrepreneurs or have sort of had that in the past will understand that every day that you get up and go to work, you're judged on your performance. And if you don't get it right, you simply don't get paid. Yeah. Right? So your survival depends on how good you are at what you do. Right? And you're judged every single day. And so I looked at it and I thought, you know what? I should do the same for my team. And so we based the model around saying to a lot of the companies that come in is that if my team does not add any value, and if my team does not help you grow, then we should not be rewarded.
Right.
We should not be paid.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really fair model because all of a sudden I get two teams very much aligned. I get the startup coming in who wants to grow and who wants to develop their business. And then I get my entire team saying, well, you know what, we need them to grow because if we don't, we've got a KPI in it. And you know what, if we don't grow, we're not going to have a job.
Right. Right. Interesting.
And so two sort of different work streams working very, very for the same sort of thing. So it really pulls everyone together.
So, and is Tomorrow Street a separate entity from Vodafone, or is it an area of Vodafone that you've branded as Tomorrow Street?
Tomorrow Street, it's a joint venture between Vodafone and the Luxembourg government.
Yeah.
Tech reports. We did it as a joint venture, and that was for a couple of reasons. Was within Vodafone, we needed to have a business unit or business area that had a little level of autonomy, because even though I'm employed by Vodafone, I still need to have that ability to be able to do and push the boundaries a little bit. But also have the security knowing that when I need to push a company into Vodafone, I still am a Vodafone employee, so I can still able to do that and have those internal conversations.
Yeah.
The government side of it was, I thought, well, if we're going to bring these startups into the country, I really need to make sure that the government will support what we're doing in terms of making it easy and easy landing for these companies to come in and help them and advocate for them. So so having the government there has been fantastic as well. So why we called it Tomorrow Street and not Vodafone Innovation Centre or what have you was because, once again, I wanted the startups to know that we were a little different.
Yeah.
And even though we've got Vodafone and the Luxembourg government, we are sort of a little bit different in terms of how we operate.
Right. You have your own kind of culture, you have your own processes, everything that comes with essentially being a separate entity rather than just a department of a bigger company.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and if you get over to Luxembourg, it will be good for you to see, Phil, and you're welcome to come because Warrick's office is now my office there as well. But
right.
They've got a pretty amazing coffee machine, which my team really like. But when you see the offices, I think it's a kind of a benchmark for the new environment for working as well. It's a really cool space. As more of our teams get in there, you can see the buzz that's coming in there as well. In terms of kind of ideation, also bringing in customers in there as well. So it's a physical space there. And I think what Warrick's saying about the Luxembourg side as well, it's just the Luxembourg government and actually the community there is just, it's really open to making it a hub for technology companies to grow. So I think the match between, and it's awesome for me to rock up to some of these big corporates now and saying, hey, we've kind of got the backing of a large corporate and a government, which is pretty unique in a way. And I think, again, Warrick is a little bit humble in some of the things he's doing there. In early May, I think it's 3rd and 4th, I should say, Warrick is and the Luxembourg government are creating this big event. We were in Barcelona a few weeks ago for the Mobile World Congress. It might not be as big as that yet, but the Arch event, the Arch Summit in May, and again, I'll take a little bit of the part from Warrick, but this is all about bridging the gap between enterprise companies and startups. And Warrick and the team are bringing a whole lot of senior execs from both their own organization, from the senior execs of their supplier base, to super innovative companies already working in Vodafone. And I think the aim is around 300 startups to be there for this mix up of enterprise people talking about how they're changing the world, how startups are doing that. There's all these competitions. I think it was about 200 or 300,000 pounds of prize money for startups to win in different categories. So this is a little bit bigger than a physical space. This is bigger than Vodafone, bigger than, I guess, the Luxembourg government. Warrick and the team there are creating an ecosystem and a scalable one. I can only see that event is going to go from good to great to amazing over the coming years as well.
No, thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks for that. But I think the whole objective was really, Mark, you can probably relate to this as well, and same with you, Phil, was that, when you're starting off your business, what you really need is network.
Yeah.
And, you get to a certain size of your business and you just need to meet people, and you need to meet the right people. And because you're being a smaller organization, a lot of the time, you can't afford the waste of time in terms of trying to go through the multiple layers of a corporate organization just to find the right person. Mm-hmm. So creating the Arch Summit was really about, what, Warrick, I said to, I get a lot of the execs coming up to me and sort of saying, Warrick, we wish, we'd love to meet some of these small companies, but a lot of the time we don't get the opportunity to do so. And then I've got the startups on the other side saying, I want to meet the right person, but I just can't get through the 2 or 3 layers there within the organization to just have the right conversation. So I thought, well, why not just bring them both together and just get them sitting in the one area and get them, interacting with each other, and get the startups to talk to the right key decision makers that can make a difference for them, but also get the executives in there to get insight into what's really happening in the market. Give them the insight and the know-how to say, this company's small today, but can be really disruptive in your industry. So, you need to think about these things and think about how they're going to affect how you develop your business in the future. Yeah. With this event, I'm looking at all our partners, and I'm looking at it and saying, well, Vodafone, we have to also have we're building these relationships with our partners. So the ability for us to even introduce them to the startups, and even if they don't deal with Vodafone itself, by dealing with our partners. I think that's something that we should be doing, rather than, we talk about, the supply-led innovation, etc. I think it has to be, a mutually beneficial relationship that can be developed in a partnership framework. And that's what I'm really hoping to, with the Arch Summit, will address as well.
Yeah, as my personal experience, and Mark, you probably have the same. You come across companies who will talk to you about recognizing that what you're doing is at an earlier stage. I'm obviously much earlier than you, Mark, but they're willing to innovate together. And they recognize that just the first time you do something may not be what you end up with, but they really see value in what you're trying to create, and they want to help you kind of do it together, versus saying, okay, I'm going to give this one shot, and if it doesn't work as we plan it in this one shot pilot, then I'm never going to work with you again. And that makes such a difference for a young company.
There's a great guy called Paul Campbell who he's created an innovation center over at Gore, the text company, and he talks about this how you simplify the processes, similar to what Warrick said and Vodafone and Simplify. But how do you get to the minimal viable synergy? I think it's a coined phrase that Paul's come up with. So, simplifying the NDA, simplifying the engagement to get the point of minimal viable synergy. Then when you get that synergy, that's the time you can start scaling these things through as well. So it's this, the corporates need to get into it, and tell the truth, for a lot of large organizations, there's a bigger risk of doing nothing or doing the same as they're doing now than starting to change. Corporates are getting disrupted, and the ways of working are getting disrupted. They have to start changing and doing things, and that may become risk, but there's risk in doing nothing. They will, their functions, their organizations will come, again, a lot less relevant. So disruptions coming to every industry, every function, every country. So they have to start changing the way they do things. And I think that's one of the big challenges for corporates. Before, you just sit with the norm. You don't try and change from that. And, but now things do change. And buying SAP or buying IBM or just buying whatever the big names were doesn't mean that you're not going to get, it may mean you don't get fired, but you may not have a job because your function is becoming irrelevant in the same period of time as well.
I think from a procurement perspective, because as you all know, I sort of don't have that sort of background, but we're sort of one of the questions that always came up to me was when I was going around and, building Tomorrow Street and looking at the right model and just sort of testing the market, was I'd end up in a lot of front of the venture capitalists around the world and accelerators. And the question that I always get asked was, why would, what's procurement got to do with innovation? Procurement's all about their buyers, at the end of the day, and they're doing orders and contracts, etc. Innovation does just not fit with them. And this was always a question that I'd always get challenged on. And I would say my response back always was, procurement has to become more strategic. And from a Vodafone perspective, because all of our procurement activity was centralized, we found sitting here, when I came here, I could have set the innovation center up anywhere. And I was very lucky. I had the support and the blank sheet to say, well, where would it best fit in our organization? And when I looked at our procurement, I thought, wow, this is a super engine, because I've got all the major partners, suppliers coming to Luxembourg, coming to meet our procurement specialist. I can sit down with them and understand their roadmaps and what's going on in the future. I can sit down with the procurement specialist within Vodafone and basically get the deep knowledge that I don't have, and have those conversations. I get, these guys get shown every single commercial model on the planet, right? So, and how it gets cut and sliced. And I looked at all of this and I thought, wow, this is amazing, where if I could set up a center here, so when Mark's sitting there and there's a supplier that comes in or a potential partner of Vodafone's come in, I can actually just grab them in the building and say, you know what, I think you should talk to Mark. I think Mark has got something here which your organization will benefit from, and I think you two should sit together and have that conversation. And I said, and I sort of said to these VCs, the last point of this is that the procurement people sitting in within Vodafone are like marriage counsellors, right? They're pulling all the different stakeholders, put them all in the room, and try to get them to all work together and move in the same direction with the supplier or the partner. And I said, you get such a good cross representation from the entire organisation just in one place. Yeah. So that's, and I'm just, the reason why I'm pointing this out is that for everyone who's, I would assume there's a lot of procurement people listening to this, is don't underestimate your function and what you do, and just how powerful your function is in terms of making that change within your own organisation and making that difference to be able to drive it to the startups, because you've got a lot more power and a lot more strategic maneuverability than you probably even realise.
That's very inspirational ending. I know I have a lot more questions, and we've got no time. We've run out of time because I know that I don't want to make you both late for your next meetings. But I couldn't agree more, obviously, with that sentiment. And it's a mindset as much as anything, I think, sometimes to really recognize the fortunate position that we're in, and to take advantage of that in the way that we really are connecting our companies with the wider environments with which we support.
Before you go, Phil, we should do, as I am a salesman as well as a CEO, our final mention for the Arch Summit. That's archsummit.lu. Okay. It's on the 3rd and 4th of May in Luxembourg. You'll get to meet Warrick. You'll meet a whole lot of startup suppliers, but also it's a great opportunity to actually explore this with some of the Tomorrow Street team, meet with them and understand what the format's like, meet some startups, and maybe try some great coffee there as well. But I think this is a bit of a movement there. We've got one of the stages there just talking about this whole enterprise to startup interaction. So we've got some great speakers, some from the procurement world and a lot from the innovation space talking about this interaction as well. So again, Phil, it would be great if you can get in your diary and come across, but it should be an amazing event. That's the end of my
I'd love to be there. I'll have to see what stops I can pull to make it happen. What I'll do is I will link up to that. So that's the Arch Summit. I'll put it in our show notes. Along with the URL. I'll also link up to Alt Street Labs, to Visible, and to Tomorrow Street for listeners who would like to get a little bit more information, and obviously Mark and Warrick to your LinkedIn profiles if listeners would like to reach out directly. And that's going to be at artofprocurement.com/Tomorrow Street. That's artofprocurement.com/Tomorrow Street. So Warrick, Mark, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. As I say, I know that I sometimes say this in my interviews that I had so much more to ask, but I truly had so much more to ask. So we're going to have to do this again sometime. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Thanks very much. And and really thank you. And I really hope that, all the listeners will be able to join the Arch Summit. And if you do come, please come up and talk to me. I'd be happy to share and share my experiences in terms of driving the innovation in our procurement area.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.